I've called meeting to order and thank you to the
All right.
LCC for starting the recording.
Yep. All right. Well, then to call the roll, Ms. Dawson,
Present.
Mr. Esme, Mr. Esme. All right. Chair Geffen, Chair Geffen, Mr. Irvin,
Present.
Ms. Kaser,
Present.
Judge Kulik, Judge Kulik, Mr. Page,
Present.
Representative Robbins,
Present.
Mr. Sandoval.
Yes, sir. Present.
Thank you. Ms. Sherlock,
Present.
Mr. Tatum, Mr. Tatum. All right. Madam Chair, 7 members are present. A quorum is present.
Perfect. So if you want to send me over the agenda, that would be awesome. Well,
Will do. And it substantively looks like the one we had this morning, in case you have that in front of you.
so thank you all for being here today. We need to do a couple of things. One of them is to talk about what we're going to do going forward as far as do we need to elect a chair, or is it going to be chair, right?
Madam Chair, I think we did discuss electing a chair as part of the first item on the chair agenda, or first item on the agenda.
But the plan for this one is for it to be Chair Geffen, correct?
Madam Chair, Chair Geffen was going to open this meeting, but since he isn't able to make it at the moment, you're opening it. But I'm not sure if you were planning on electing him a permanent chair or not. That's up to the members.
Okay. Okay. So, yep, sure don't know what to do right now. So let's,
I'm sorry, is it possible to nominate him without him being present? Is that allowed?
Ms. Dawson, Chair Evans, as far as I'm aware, yes, so long as he doesn't mind being deputized in his absence.
I don't want to do that without, I think he planned on being here. So.
Oh, sorry, Chair Evans, Mr. Page's hand is raised.
Okay. Mr. Page?
Thank you, Vice Chair Evans. I guess I would request that we wait to hold off nominating Chair Geffen to also chair this subcommittee in case he's not going to have time to do that or would prefer to have someone else lead it. So I would just request that we hold off on that for now.
Yeah, and is there any other nominations? Would be the other thing, right? So yep, let's wait for that part yeah, I don't want to do the subcommittee thing. If nobody else wants to nominate somebody else or nominate themselves, we'll wait on that, because I don't want to nominate John if Ms. Chair Geffen, if he doesn't feel like he has time for another subcommittee. So then we'll move on to future topics and schedule. And so the topic of this subcommittee is disqualifications, and it's a very big topic. We had the data subcommittee meeting and the remedies subcommittee meeting, and we talked about a few of these issues. And so I'd just like to open the floor to get feedback from you all about what are some of the issues that we should cover in this, and Will is going to take some notes. So
And just so I'm clear, you're looking for some possible topics. I apologize. I want to make sure. Okay. Well, I know looking at our prior list, I'll just start. One of the topics that is of particular importance to me is the inclusion of juveniles in the disqualification statute, and especially, I think at most it would be permanent disqualifications for crimes committed when someone is a juvenile. But to me, I think just also as it applies to all juveniles.
And I got a text message today from the author of the bill, Heather Edelson, and she asked that we for sure include juveniles, that we talk about juveniles specifically in this. So.
Madam Chair, Representative Robbins and Mr. Page's hands are raised. I don't know if you can see that on your end.
I can barely, because your back, Representative Robbins, because your background is the same color as the hand. So my apologies. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. So one of the things that I really am looking forward to early on in our time together is the testimony from people who have been disqualified for various reasons under current statute and understanding those barriers. So I would just like to encourage the committee to set aside time early in the next year to hear from those people, because I think that will help us level set some of the specific statutory changes we may be looking at. And then secondly, I'm also interested in sort of the data privacy concerns that are raised by some of the disqualification issues. Some in other contexts are considered private data. And here I understand there are concerns about some of it being changed in classification, or who has access to data that remains private. So under the classification. So I'm just interested in both of those topics for your consideration. Thank you.
Mr. Page.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I think taking a look at I assume this would fall under the purview of this subcommittee, but taking a look at the list of crimes and trying to figure out how they are related, or if they are related, to the purpose of behind a background study, and figure out additionally disqualification periods, and take a look at those and see if there's data around whether the disqualification time periods match up with recidivism rates for those types of crimes. So the actual crimes and the time period seem to be pretty important.
I agree. And I wonder if this group has any thoughts about, so data from DHS is going to be really specific around background studies they've done, how they do them, all of that stuff. And so I'm wondering if this group has any thoughts about where else, could we get it from, some information from Kelly Mitchell at Robina, or could we get some information about maybe from other states, or if there is any evidence to, like the way we do it here in Minnesota is every felony is 15 years, every gross misdemeanor is 10 years, every misdemeanor is 7 years. Arbitrary in the fact that a felony is the most serious, and that's why it's 15. A gross misdemeanor is less serious, but arbitrary in that a felony of robbery and a felony of a 5th degree possession are very different in severity level, but still carry that same 15-year waiting period. But no difference as far as a felony as a felony. And so I wonder if there's somebody else besides DHS that we could ask to bring us some data, because DHS is telling us that they are very, very busy right now, and that getting us data is going to be a little difficult for them. And so does anybody have any ideas about where we could get data from, I guess?
Madam Chair, apologies for interrupting. Ms. Sherlock's hand is up, and Representative Robbins is, I don't know if you're just leaving your hand up though, Representative Robbins. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yep. Ms. Sherlock, I just was, that was kind of a follow-up statement to what Max was talking about, as far as does the evidence support time periods and stuff. So Ms. Sherlock.
Thank you. I'm interested and hope that this subcommittee will be talking about really looking at the differences between what's required in Minnesota state law related to foster care licensing, child foster care licensing, and the difference between that and the background study requirements for adopting in Minnesota versus taking a transfer of permanent physical legal custody. So in essence, the laws that we have in Minnesota about background study requirements related to permanency, adoption, or transfers of permanent physical legal custody are much more simplistic than they are for foster care licensing. So in other words, to be a temporary foster parent, there's a lot higher bar to meet for background studies. And so we eliminate a lot of relatives out of foster care licensing. People who cannot pass a background check for foster care licensing can in fact pass a background study for adoption or permanent physical legal custody, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. That permanent, it's easier to be a permanent parent than it is to be a temporary parent. And there's a lot of disqualifications that seem to have little to do with actual safety of kids in homes versus things like welfare fraud, for example, that will keep a relative, even if it was a very long time ago, could keep a relative from being a foster parent currently. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. So there seem to be a lot of background study issues that will heavily impact the BIPOC communities, any communities who are historically targeted by law enforcement, any communities that live in poverty, and it really is not helpful for foster care licensing for those purposes. And I'd like to see something that's more equitable, such as the laws that we follow for adoption, again, adoption and transfers of permanent physical legal custody.
Are you aware of the changes that happened, the legislative changes that happened last year around the Family Preservation Act in foster care? And are you aware of the changes that happened?
Yep, the changes that happened, I think, are not significant enough or do not go far enough. So just to give an example, to pass a background study for adoption, we follow the federal Title IV laws. And so it's down to about maybe 7 crimes that are on this list that would be barriers to receiving Title IV adoption assistance, and then in essence would bar you from adopting. Those are equitable to what would be permanent DQ crimes for foster care. In other words, really serious, like you're harming people, you're raping people, you're murdering people, serious, and it has to be a felony level conviction. In foster care license, you do not have to be convicted of a crime. There is a preponderance of evidence that can disqualify you even if you've not been charged, tried, or convicted of a crime. So that is a huge difference. And there's only, like I said, a handful of them, and they're reserved for the most serious. And then there is a time limited restriction to adopt if you have certain drug offenses. So they're limited to like 5 years, I believe is what it is. It doesn't go on for, 10, 15 years. It's not a whole long list. If you look at the DQ lists for foster care licensing, it's about 15 pages of crimes to look through, to sort through what level. And again, it's all a preponderance of evidence. So it's someone's opinion about what happened based on usually a police report that's pulled.
Yeah.
Where in permanency, it's have you been convicted of a crime? And it has to be a felony level. There's nothing about gross misdemeanor. There's nothing about misdemeanor. So
Got it.
it's a simpler process. It seems a little more equitable. And it doesn't hold people up generally for the rest of their lives for a lot of different crimes. There's a few crimes that you would be excluded from adopting, but not nearly like it is in foster care licensing.
Got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
And I would definitely recommend, and I don't know if someone said this already, but I would definitely recommend us looking at that permanent list. And then looking at what other states do in that area. And as far as having a permanent list, because forever is a very long time. And to think that a person is incapable of ever changing. There's a few things, maybe looking at this federal Title IV list of 7 crimes and what are those 7 crimes? And because there's way more than 7 crimes on that permanent list. One of them being failure to register for a predatory offense. And that can be something as simple as like not being homeless and not reporting where you live. And so I would love to have this group look at that permanent list.
Madam Chair, Representative Robbins' hand is up.
Yep. Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to ask a point of clarification. So when we're asking the group for help with data or help with finding comparisons in other states, is there a staff person assigned to this committee? Okay.
Yeah. Will.
So Will, this is all on you. Just to be clear, you're not just facilitating, you will track this all down for us?
Yes, Representative Robbins, time permitting, because I'm the administrator researcher full time for to support this task force. So I'm juggling all the various needs of the task force. But whatever research needs this subcommittee has, I can definitely add that to the list essentially. And I'll be working with the legislative library staff, et cetera, et cetera. But this is my full time responsibility.
All right. Thank you for clarifying and thank you for your help.
The other thing is too, when we talk to DHS about data, they let us know that they're very short staffed and that any data requests that we have, we need to prioritize them. So just so everybody knows.
Madam Chair, Ms. Sherlock and Ms. Kaser's hands are up.
Ms. Kaser, do you want to go? We haven't heard from you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One recommendation, and I think this aligns with the subcommittee, is kind of looking at the risk of harm and the current statutes and the criminal disqualifications, and does it make sense? The other thing I would note is maybe something as a guiding point is there is actually I found, love the internet, right? Found a previous report to the legislature around DHS background studies from, I think it was 2002 possibly, or 2007, actually 2008, sometime in that time. So I think some of those recommendations might still be very valid that we would maybe want to look at. Again, so we're not maybe recreating the wheel and having to do a ton of groundwork since we have just a short time frame. But maybe that's a good starting point if everyone can get that. I'm certainly happy to send that to you, Will, And then we could get it out to the subcommittee to look at, and then we can kind of go from there in terms of determining where do we want to make our recommendations with kind of the current information we have.
Yep, I've read that report. It's very specific to this topic that we're talking about. Dan Kane and some other folks were on that, and there's some great recommendations on there. So I would agree with you. Yeah, if you want to send that over to Will, or I can. Ms. Sherlock?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am very interested in seeing the report, Tiffany, that you're referencing, and I will, I'm sure you can get that out to everybody, and thank you very much. There's no chat feature here. I was going to put in the chat the Minnesota statute that talks about the background study requirements for adoption, and they mirror the federal 4E requirement. And so people can look at that list and see where that is. And that's in Minnesota statute 26N as in Nancy .23, and it's in subdivision 4. It's about background study if people want to look. Considerably shorter than for foster care license.
Do you have your hand up again, Ms. Sherlock?
No, I meant
Okay.
to turn it. I meant to lower it. Thank
Okay,
you.
just making sure. Yep, I think that risk of harm thing is really important that Tiffany just brought up, and making sure that it really aligns with the crime committed and the length of time. Max talked about the same thing, and so I think that's going to be a really important issue for us to get around. Does the crime and the amount of time match for folks? The other thing I think too, and we've talked about this at March and in the substance use disorder field, like if somebody's crimes are drug related, they've gotten treatment and got their lives together, and now they want to be a peer support person or an LADC, like, doesn't it make sense for that to be fast tracked? And we tried to do that with some traveling set asides. We tried to do that with some legislative stuff, and it hasn't, we haven't been able to do that well. Where here's one example, we at Teen Challenge, we moved all, and Dave, you could talk probably about this better than me, but we moved all of our women from one building to another building. And there was supposed to be traveling set asides. There was supposed to be kind of these remedies. And instead we've had to have full background studies done for all of our staff to move from one building to another, all redone again, instead of already had background studies done. And now we're waiting for all of those redone background studies. And, you think about that as far as like time and energy, but like, what about cost to government to redo all of those background studies that were already done? And so, Dave, did you want to comment to that?
Sorry, I was muted. We also just had a DHS audit in one of our programs in Minneapolis. And this week we just concluded an audit up in Brainerd. And there are a number of things that become problematic. If somebody comes in here, we do a DHS background study. They pass that, we affiliate them with a license. At some point in their career here, we move them to another program. You just mentioned a building moving, but we could move them from men's program to women's. We could move them from short-term to long-term. We move them within our agency. If we don't affiliate them to a different license, DHS comes in, looks at that, says they're not on this roster, and pulls them off the floor until we initiate another background study. And it's the same person. They already studied them. They already passed them. And then in the case where there is a disqualification and they apply for a set aside and their a reconsideration, and they're granted a set aside, and we want to move them to another program, they have to reapply for reconsideration again, which doesn't make any sense. It just seems so bureaucratic with I don't have any idea what the objective would be or the benefit would be of having to put those people, those individuals who have already been studied and passed or studied and granted a set aside, to have to go through another background check. The same crimes are going to be there. The same results going to be there. The reconsideration process will have to be initiated again. And meanwhile, they're not working and we don't have somebody to cover the shift. It just, I'm sure at some point it was well intended. I can't figure out what it was, but there are so many things that it feels like as these regulations were written that somebody added on to them as they thought up a new possibility of risk, and they never considered what has been done before it. And as a result, an agency like ours, who has many different licenses in many different locations, we get caught not fully understanding all of the regulations, and then we get fined and we have our staff pulled off the floor. And it's very frustrating. And then everybody looks at me like, what? Why don't I understand this law better? Well, if you've ever tried to read through this whole law, it's pretty confusing.
Mhm.
And one more thing, Tiffany, I'm not sure if the study you were talking about is titled DHS Background Studies, Disqualifications and Set Aside, a report and recommendations of the 2007 Collateral Sanctions Committee. Do you have it? Because if you don't, I have it. You do have it? Okay.
We'll just send it out.
Okay.
Tiffany.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just was going to kind of piggyback what you were sharing and then what Dave Irving just shared, that it is rather frustrating. I see it with our childcare licensing side, a provider maybe closed their childcare license and wants to reopen, and they have to go through that entire process. Even if it's been less than a year, there's been no changes. And maybe their household member who's not actually even providing the direct service has to be background studied, and they have to go through that disqualification and the request for reconsideration and set aside. So we have a provider right now who is sitting, waiting, and can't open her childcare because of that reason. And it's rather frustrating because she's not getting any income. And so I think of this as just one example, and this is probably happening over and over. And so how can we maybe make some recommendations to clean up this process? I think needs to be looked at for sure.
And lighten the load for DHS. Like you think about right now, I heard at one point, like 200,000 background studies behind. And what does that cost us as taxpayers if, even 10,000 of them are studies that have already been done, that they're restudying for these reasons that we're talking about, like looking to the legislature to fix it for us as taxpayers, right? Like to clean up some of this. Leo?
Yeah, and that's where most of my interest lies in this group as well. Just to piggyback on what you guys said, being someone that's been impacted by some of these decisions for things that have happened in the past, and being someone that's fully been restored and have established credibility within my community and very productive member of society, it's been very hurtful and frustrating at times to have been held back, especially, when it comes to recovery services where, I've been clean and sober for 10 years in April, and I'm getting disqualified from being able to help people in that field. And it's happened time and time again in different things that I might have applied for or had an interest in. Where, because of the way it's structured, it's held me back. And to be honest, I can't think of anyone that would be more suited to help people in recovery, and it's hard statistically, for people to stay sober. And I mean, it's hard. And to have, you know, someone who is abstaining, to help out is very important. So that's where my passion lies. And so whenever the right time is for me to kind of share more insight on that, just let me know. And yep, thank you.
Ms. Sherlock?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really have been taken with the timing of all this. We have a lot of folks, first of all, as soon as there's these hits on the background checks, it takes a really long time to get them from DHS. And then if you have to go through a request for reconsideration, a variance process, sometimes that delays us. Sometimes that takes 6 months to a year to get through that process. And I fully realize, listening to people who are disqualified from employment, that's maybe time that they are sitting there unemployed waiting to get paid, which is an enormous burden. We also have other financial burdens, and there's other financial implications if we have kids that are sitting in unlicensed homes because they're relatives and we're waiting for this process. Huge implications, financial implications to the counties. So it seems to me that there's a lot of relatives that we can get variances for, minus the really severe crimes. We get variances for relatives all the time. So it seems to me like if that's what the end result is going to be for many, many of these crimes, why make us jump through all these hoops that takes 6 months to a year? And that also burdens DHS, as you said, because they have to have the staff to work these through their process. And it just seems to me like we can unburden much of the system in many ways for individuals who can get working faster, can get paid faster, to kids who can be put into relatives' homes faster and be less traumatized through the foster care process, if we can figure out a way to streamline this. And that starts right from the beginning of what we have on the disqualification list. So if we reduce that, if we then figure out a streamlined process to get variances done, it just seems like the system will have some much needed relief. If they're behind 200,000, these are not going fast. And that time to get the background check done, especially because of that preponderance of evidence, takes time. And if anybody lived in another state during the look back period and they have to rely on getting other states' records and finding police reports from that state and then trying to figure out what that crime in that state equates to in the state of Minnesota, and then figure out if that's a DQ. This is all a huge, enormous manual process that takes a ton of time. And it doesn't seem like it should be this challenging.
Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to go back to what Ms. Sherlock was just saying for my own benefit, because I am not familiar with this. So you referenced, ma'am, that you get variances for these similar crimes in another situation. Could you just expand for me what situation?
So in foster care licensing, if a person's background comes back and they have certain DQs, not the permanent DQs, but one of the other DQs that we were talking about, the 15-year, the 10-year, the 7-year, and then the period of look back, the bar period, feeds into all of this. But we're able to go through a process, a request for reconsideration process, that either will lead to a variance for that relative, which said it allows us to license them despite the background issues through either a variance or a set aside. And that process to do that, we in the county, it's the applicant's responsibility to request this, but we in the county who are licensing help relatives through these processes because they're very cumbersome, they're time consuming, and they're complicated. So, and they're not generally system savvy. So we have to help them through that process. And many, many, many times it leads to a variance. So in the end, we get them licensed, but we've probably taken 6 to 12 months longer than we should have to get them licensed. And that time period that they're not licensed has major financial implications for the county in paying out of home placement costs, because the feds will not allow us to claim reimbursement. The feds, it's a very complicated process, but the feds contribute, if kids are 4E eligible, they contribute to about, every state's different, but about 50% of the placement costs that we incur in the state of Minnesota. And as long as they're in relatives' homes that are unlicensed, which is permissible while they're getting licensed, we don't get any federal reimbursement for that. And so that's costing the state of Minnesota a lot of money.
Yeah, we just talked about not this specific issue. So we had the remedies, which is where we're actually talking about all this stuff, Ms. Sherlock. And so on top of that, Representative Robbins, this is just around child foster care and adoption and stuff, the issues she's talking about. For those of us that are looking for employment, that there's this same system for background checks, and the remedy to that is these set asides. And for us, we have 30 days to get all of our background stuff, all of our background information, including police reports and stuff, and to fill out this arduous application, go to the police departments, get the police reports and get them in. And then sometimes we wait 8 months for DHS to get an answer back to us, where, like Dave talked about, we're not able to be employed by our employer and we're not able to get a paycheck during that time. And sometimes it's for drug charges or a check forgery. Sometimes it can be writing your own checks, right? It's fraud or whatever. And so these are the issues that we're trying to solve here, because oftentimes the risk of harm that we're talking about, to be working in a drug treatment program or adult foster care, or it doesn't match the crime that you commit.
Right. No, I understand. I was just more referencing the specific system where it seemed like the county was having success getting the variances, but it wasn't seeming to be applied more widely. Thank you.
We do get success. It's just the timing of it. And so what I'm just saying is it worth everyone's time if that's going to end that way, to add 6 to 12 months onto the process? Whereas Ms. Evans is saying somebody individual might not get a paycheck during that time. And for systems, it's sometimes prohibiting us from moving kids into relatives' homes. And if they are there, it's a financial burden on the counties to do it. So just saying, like, what's the end game here? What are we trying to get out of this process, and the hoops that we make people jump through, instead of just narrowing the focus down to the really severe crimes that we think are risk heavy, the things that we feel like that is too much risk, we cannot take that on. And there will be some of those crimes, I'm sure, but it doesn't have to be 15 pages of them.
Any other topics that we want to make sure that we cover, and then we can move on to meetings going forward? I think those were the big ones that we talked about, was risk of harm and the permanent list, foster care. Does this time work for folks? This 3 to 4 on Tuesdays? If we did, like, to start with, maybe every 2 weeks.
Madam Chair.
Mhm.
I have a standing meeting every week at this time, but if this is if this works for everyone else, then I'm happy to make that work as well.
So I heard back from John. He sends his apologies. And he will accept the nomination for chair. So we should do that. Does somebody want to nominate John?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I second.
Perfect. Any discussion? Awesome. So do we need a roll call vote, Will?
Yes, Madam Chair, and I can proceed with that if you'd like.
Perfect, thank you.
Ms. Dawson,
In favor.
Mr. Esme, Mr. Esme, Chair Geffen, Chair Geffen, Mr. Urban,
In favor.
Ms. Kaser,
In favor.
Judge Kulik, Judge Kulik, Mr. Page,
Yes.
Representative Robbins,
Aye.
Mr. Sandoval,
Yes.
Ms. Sherlock,
In favor.
Mr. Tatum, Mr. Tatum. All right, Madam Chair, the votes are 7 ayes, no nays. The motion carries.
So is there so I'm trying to talk to John and do this. I apologize. So do Mondays work for folks for this? Is Mondays a lighter day for people?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
So Monday afternoons, we will start having session. So I will not be able to participate once we go into session on January 31st. Monday mornings
Okay.
are open.
Okay, so Monday mornings. Does that work for other people? All right, that looks good.
Madam Chair,
Mhm.
could I make a recommendation that, similar to how Will sent out, I think it was a doodle poll to schedule this meeting, maybe we possibly look at something similar at a recurring time, understanding that there's always going to be conflicts for individuals, certain dates,
Yeah.
but if we can look at a recurring time, possibly Monday mornings, or Tuesday afternoons, or whatever might work.
Yep, I think that'll work well too, because we're trying to schedule around the other subcommittees as well for John and I. And so I think that's a great idea, actually, Tiffany, because it's a lot. So did you have something, Ms. Sherlock?
Yes, thank you. I'm just wondering if we know how frequently we're planning on meeting. I, like many others here, I'm sure on the call, I can sometimes make Monday mornings work and sometimes I can't make Monday mornings, just as an example. So how
Yep.
frequently are we planning on meeting?
So the data is meeting every week until through January to get moving, because data is really important for all of us. The remedies subcommittee is going to meet every other week through February, because we have a report that's going to be due March 1st. And now we're deciding, what do we want to do, bearing that piece of information. Like, we have our first report due to the legislature March 1st. And probably what that report is going to look like is, here are the topic areas we've deemed are going to be problematic. And this is what our report to you is going to look like at the end of the year. We're not going to have time, especially with the fact that we really don't have hardly any data yet from DHS. What can our report actually say, other than here are the topic areas that we see as problematic? That's probably what our report's mostly going to say. And then from March 1st to December 31st, we'll have time to get down and do some work. So to answer your question, it's for us to decide right now how often we're gonna meet between now and when our report is due March 1st. So I would recommend probably every 2 weeks. We have a lot in our bucket. Like this is the biggest bucket of stuff, these disqualifications. And I think once John gets here, he will have some other thoughts about some of the work that needs to get done. But this is definitely the biggest bucket of stuff. Lucas, did you unmute? Or were you going to say something?
Yeah, I did. And then I was struggling to actually raise my hand. I'm not really quite sure. It's not clicking very well for me today. No, I think that makes sense. I think if we can do the every other week, and then as Tiffany had suggested, perhaps get out a doodle poll sometime here before the holidays actually start, and we can maybe get some of these on our calendar, because of course we all have busy schedules, and realizing try to make as much work as we all can.
Yeah. Yeah, I hate to get off this call. We still have 8 minutes, and I hate to get off. Is this an hour meeting? Well,
Madam Chair, sorry. I scheduled this one for 2 hours, but we have the room for as long as the members need it. It's essentially arbitrary how long I schedule these things for. If you'd like to set a particular meeting time, though, just let me know.
okay. Without having another meeting time, especially without John being here. What does Tuesday, are people taking the 4th off? I see lots of shaking of heads. Does the 4th work for folks?
4th works for me.
And Madam Chair, it looks like Dave Irvin has indicated thumbs up. As has Ms. Kaser.
All right.
And Madam Chair, sorry to interrupt. I definitely am available to send out a doodle poll if members would prefer. Obviously, it can be somewhat easier to schedule, things when everybody's together. But as this is a large group, I leave that up to your discretion, obviously. But just let me know.
John said Tuesday works. So if we want to get something together for Tuesday the 4th, and if you want to send out a doodle poll for timing or whatever, or if people want to, however we want to do that, and then we can give people back an hour of their week.
Madam Chair, how long do you and the members want to meet for on Tuesday? Just for my information for setting up the poll.
I would say probably for an hour and a half. If I would have known I was chairing this meeting, I would have set up some agenda items and done this a little bit differently, but I wasn't prepared for this. And I know John would have done this differently. This is a really big bucket of stuff, and we had a lot of stuff in this bucket to talk about, and I don't even have it in front of me to address it. But I know we have a lot of work to do. We even talked about in disqualifications, if maybe some of that stuff this group wanted remedies to do, like around permanent disqualifications, if this group wanted us to share some of that work, because this is a big pot of stuff that we need to do in this group. So anyways.
And Gina, if I could, I think at least for me, now knowing that there is this report, which is quite lengthy, and hearing the statute that was suggested by Melissa, and well, if you wouldn't mind, I wasn't taking notes to actually write down that statute number, if you wouldn't mind sending that out. I think to me, and I'm willing to commit at least to read through that report and look at that statute, I think that'll allow for the next meeting to definitely kind of see, as Tiffany pointed out, to maybe what we don't need to reinvent, and maybe that can help guide some conversations about this and what we want to be looking at too, and maybe help us kind of be more focused at the next one.
Madam Chair, Ms. Dawson, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Sherlock, but I think the statute number was Minnesota statutes 26N, as in November, .23, and then it was subsection 4, and I can certainly send out a copy of that.
It's 256N.
256N. Sorry about that.
Yep.
And so Will's going to send you guys, there's actually 2 reports. The larger one was the collateral sanctions report. The one that has the most relevant information to us is actually called the DHS background study report, which was a report that was part of the larger collateral sanctions report. So, and it's shorter. All right. Anything else?
Madam Chair,
Mhm.
would Mr. Vogel also be able to send out with that information? I know it's going to be a lot of information, but possibly what was passed legislatively for the foster care background studies? I think it was under, I have the number here, under special session 1, article, or chapter 7, article 2, sections 53 and 55 for this group to review, because that'll be good to compare what's going to be implemented July 1st related, just it's specific to foster care. But so again, we're not making recommendations that have already are going to go into effect.
Yeah, and it would be good to see what the legislature was okay to do with around childcare and foster care, and if that gives a flavor for would they be willing to do it around licensing and employment. Yeah, I agree. That's why I asked Ms. Sherlock if you knew what passed, because I think that's important for us to know. Take the temperature.
And Madam Chair, Ms. Kaser, I can absolutely send that out as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, if there isn't any other comments or any other topics that we want to talk about, one of the things I just want to mention to Representative Robbins is in the data group, we talked about making sure that part of that data group that gets presented to the larger group is the stories of impacted people. So that will be part of those data sets that get brought in, and we're not sure how that's going to happen yet, but we want to make sure that people hear how that impacts folks. So we'll get that.
Thank you.
In there. Good deal. All right, well, if there's nothing further, I will adjourn the meeting today, 12:21. Thanks, everyone.